A secret weapon, born from a radical design philosophy, unleashed a reign of terror over the skies of Europe. This deadly machine, a nightmare for Allied pilots, was so advanced it forced an evolution in air combat. By the end of this journey, you will understand how one aircraft could single-handedly shift the balance of power in the air, and why its fearsome reputation as the butcher bird was so brutally earned. What made the Focke-Wulf 190 Germany's most advanced dogfighter? And how did this unseen predator almost bring the Royal Air Force to its knees? The year is 1941. The skies over Nazi-occupied France are a lethal chessboard. The Royal Air Force, confident in their legendary Spitfire Mk5, launches a series of offensive sweeps, taking the fight to the enemy. But something is wrong. Their pilots, veterans of the Battle of Britain, are being cut from the sky with catastrophic ease. They report a new German fighter, a machine that appears as if from nowhere, strikes with lightning speed, and vanishes before they can react. It is a radial-engined Phantom, a startling departure from the sleek, liquid-cooled Messerschmitts they are used to. This new menace is faster, more agile at high speeds, and armed with a devastating punch of cannons and machine guns. The British pilots have no answer. Panic begins to creep into the ranks of the RAF. They have encountered the Focke-Wulf 190, an aircraft that will forever change the face of aerial warfare. This is the story of its creation, its reign of terror, and the desperate race to counter its technological superiority. It is a story of engineering genius, of the brave men who flew it and the equally brave men who flew against it. This is the story of the Würger, the Shrike, a bird of prey that became a legend. To understand the birth of this revolutionary fighter, we must go back to the mid-1930s, a time of immense technological ferment in Germany. The Luftwaffe, reborn and rearmed under the Nazi regime, was already equipped with the formidable Messerschmitt Bf 109. It was a world-class fighter, a symbol of German air power. But the German Air Ministry, the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, or RLM, was already looking to the future. They understood a chilling reality of air combat. Technological superiority is always temporary. They issued a contract for a new fighter, a machine that would not necessarily replace the Bf 109, but fight alongside it, a partner in domination. Several companies submitted proposals, but it was the Focke-Wulf Flugzeugbau, under the brilliant leadership of chief designer Kurt Tank, that dared to be different. Tank was a visionary. He believed in a philosophy of ruggedness, reliability, and immense firepower. He envisioned a Pferd, a workhorse, not a thoroughbred racehorse like the Bf 109. He made a controversial choice that would define the FW 190. He opted for a powerful, air-cooled radial engine, the BMW 801. At the time, this was almost heresy in European fighter design. The prevailing wisdom dictated that fighters needed sleek, in-line, liquid-cooled engines like the Rolls-Royce Merlin or the Daimler-Benz DB601 for a streamlined aerodynamic profile. Radial engines were considered bulky, creating too much drag, suitable for bombers and transport planes, but not for nimble dogfighters. Kurt Tank disagreed. He saw the inherent advantages of the radial engine. It was more resistant to battle damage. A single stray bullet could sever a coolant line on a liquid-cooled engine, causing it to seize within minutes. A radial engine, with its individual air-cooled cylinders, could absorb significant punishment and keep running. This was the heart of Tank's workhorse philosophy. The design team at Focke-Wulf worked in secret. What they created was a masterpiece of engineering. The FW 190 was compact, muscular, and brutally efficient. Its wide-track landing gear, a stark contrast to the Bf 109's notoriously narrow and unforgiving gear, made it far safer on takeoff and landing. This was a critical feature, as many Bf-109s were lost in operational accidents. The cockpit was a revelation. Tank, a former test pilot himself, designed it with the pilot in mind. It offered superb all-round visibility, a stark contrast to the Spitfire's more cramped and restricted view. The controls were logically laid out, and a revolutionary electrical system automated many of the engine and propeller functions, reducing the pilot's workload in the heat of combat. This allowed the pilot to focus on one thing: fighting. The FW-190 was a hunter's aircraft. Its armament was simply terrifying for the time. The initial A-series models were equipped with a devastating combination of 4 20mm cannons and 2 7.92mm machine guns. This gave it a weight of fire that could shred an Allied fighter in a single, well-aimed burst. The Spitfire MKV, its primary opponent in 1941, was armed with a mix of cannons and smaller 30.93 caliber machine guns, a combination that was often not enough to bring down the rugged German fighter. The FW-190 was built to deliver a knockout punch. When the first prototypes took to the sky in 1939, they showed immense promise. But there were problems. The powerful BMW 801 engine was prone to overheating, a critical flaw that took months of painstaking work to resolve. But Kurt Tank and his team were relentless. They perfected the design, and in the summer of 1941, the FW-190 was ready for war. Its arrival on the Channel front would be a shock to the system for the Royal Air Force. Music shifts to a more tense, action-oriented theme. In August 1941, the pilots of Jagdgeschwader 26, one of the Luftwaffe's elite fighter wings, began converting to the new FW-190. At first, they were skeptical. They were masters of the Bf-109, and this new stubby-winged fighter felt different. But their skepticism quickly turned to elation. The FW-190 was a revelation. It was faster than the Spitfire, especially in a dive. Its roll rate was phenomenal, allowing it to change direction with a speed that left its opponents struggling to keep up. One of the early FW-190 aces, Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Pips Priller, famously remarked on its superior speed and handling. He knew this aircraft was a game-changer. The British pilots, flying their daily sweeps over France, were about to discover this the hard way. The initial encounters were bewildering for the RAF. They would be flying a patrol, and suddenly their wingman would just explode. The attacks came from above and behind with terrifying speed. The FW-190s would dive on the British formations, fire a devastating burst from their cannons, and then continue their dive, using their superior speed to escape before the Spitfires could react. The British pilots dubbed this unseen enemy the Butcher Bird. The name stuck. It was a testament to the FW-190's brutal efficiency. The psychological impact was immense. RAF morale plummeted. For the first time since the Battle of Britain, they were technologically outclassed. The so-called Focke-Wulf scourge had begun. The British desperately needed to get their hands on one of these new fighters to understand its secrets. Their chance would come in a most unexpected way. On June 23, 1942, Oberleutnant Armin Faber of Jagdgeschwader 2 was engaged in a dogfight with Spitfires over the English coast. Disoriented in the heat of battle, he mistook the Bristol Channel for the English Channel. Thinking he was heading back to his base in France, he landed at RAF Pembrey in Wales. The British couldn't believe their luck. They now had a pristine, fully operational FW-190A3. It was immediately whisked away to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough for intense evaluation. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears. The FW-190 was a superb fighting machine. It was faster than the Spitfire Mk5 at most altitudes. It could outdive it, and it could outroll it. The German fighter's performance was a brutal wake-up call for Allied aircraft designers. The race was on to create a fighter that could match the Butcher bird. The strategic implications were profound. The FW-190's dominance over the Channel front gave the Luftwaffe a significant advantage. It blunted the RAF's offensive fighter sweeps and made daylight bombing raids by the Royal Air Force incredibly costly. The FW-190 was not just a dogfighter, it was a highly effective fighter-bomber as well. The Yabo variants, as they were known, could carry a significant bomb load and were a constant thorn in the side of Allied shipping and ground forces. The FW-190's versatility was another of its key strengths. It could adapt to different roles, from high-altitude interception to low-level ground attack, making it one of the most effective combat aircraft of the war. Let's break down the tactical advantages that made the FW-190 such a formidable opponent. Its primary strength was its incredible roll rate. A skilled FW-190 pilot could execute a snap roll and be pointing in a different direction almost instantaneously. This made it incredibly difficult to get a bead on in a dogfight. Allied pilots were taught to avoid a turning fight with a Spitfire, but they were also warned never to get into a rolling scissors maneuver with an FW-190. It was a fight they would almost certainly lose. Another key advantage was its speed in a dive. The FW-190 could escape almost any situation by simply nosing over and diving away. Its sturdy airframe could withstand the immense stress of high-speed dives that would tear the wings off other aircraft. The FW-190 pilot had another ace up his sleeve, the BMW 801 engine. While the Spitfire's Merlin engine was a marvel of engineering, its carburetor was susceptible to cutting out under negative G-forces, such as when pushing the stick forward to enter a dive. The FW-190's fuel-injected BMW 801 had no such problem. This meant an FW-190 could simply bunt over into a dive, leaving a pursuing Spitfire momentarily powerless as its engine sputtered. This small but critical difference decided the outcome of countless aerial duels. The combination of high speed, a phenomenal roll rate, powerful armament, and a reliable engine made the FW-190 the ultimate energy fighter. German pilots perfected the boom and zoom tactic, diving on their opponents, making a single, devastating attack run, and then using their speed to climb back to altitude and set up another attack. It was a deadly and efficient way of fighting, and the FW-190 was the perfect instrument for it. Of course, the FW-190 was not invincible. At higher altitudes, above 25,000 feet, its performance began to drop off. The Spitfire Mk9, introduced in the summer of 1942 and specifically designed to counter the FW-190, had a superior high-altitude performance thanks to its two-stage supercharged Merlin engine. A skilled Spitfire pilot could lure an FW-190 into a high-altitude fight where the advantage would shift in his favor. The FW-190 also had a relatively short range, which limited its effectiveness as a long-range escort fighter. But in its element, in the medium to low-altitude skies over France and the Low Countries, the FW-190 was king. The human element is central to the story of any great aircraft. The men who flew the FW-190 were some of the most skilled and experienced pilots in the Luftwaffe. Aces like Otto Kittel, Walter Nowotny, and Erich Rudorfer scored hundreds of victories, many of them while flying the Würger. These were the Experten, the masters of aerial combat. Their personal accounts paint a vivid picture of what it was like to fly this incredible machine. They speak of its power, its responsiveness, and the confidence it inspired. But they also speak of the brutal reality of the air war, the constant fear, the loss of comrades, and the overwhelming odds they faced as the war turned against Germany. On the other side of the coin were the Allied pilots who had to face the FW-190 in combat. Their memoirs are filled with a mixture of fear, respect, and a burning desire to defeat this deadly adversary. The FW-190 was more than just a machine. It was a symbol of German technological prowess and a deadly challenge that had to be overcome. The climax of the FW-190's story as a pure air superiority fighter can be seen in the intense battles over the Channel front in 1942 and 1943. One of the most significant of these was the Dieppe raid in August 1942. This amphibious assault by Allied forces, primarily Canadian, was a disaster on the ground, but in the air it was a titanic struggle. The RAF and the Luftwaffe threw everything they had into the battle. It was the first major test of the new Spitfire Mk9 against the FW-190 in large numbers. The air battles over Dieppe were a brutal, swirling melee of dogfights, with hundreds of aircraft engaged in a life-or-death struggle. The FW-190s, flown by the battle-hardened pilots of JG-2 and JG-26, inflicted heavy losses on the Allied air forces. While the Spitfire Mk9 proved to be a worthy opponent, the FW-190 demonstrated its continued effectiveness, especially at lower altitudes. The lessons learned at Dieppe were costly, but they were vital for the Allies. They now knew what they were up against and redoubled their efforts to produce fighters that could not just match but surpass the FW-190. As the war progressed, the role of the FW-190 began to change. The strategic bombing campaign by the American 8th Air Force was gaining momentum. Huge formations of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators, escorted by long-range fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt and later the P-51 Mustang, were now striking deep into the heart of Germany. The Luftwaffe was forced onto the defensive. The FW-190, originally designed as an offensive fighter, was now tasked with a new, desperate mission: to stop the bombers. To do this, it was up-gunned and up-armored. New variants known as Sturmböcke, or battering rams, were introduced. These were heavily armed FW-190s, some equipped with massive 30mm cannons, designed to break up the bomber formations. The pilots of these Sturmböcke units were expected to press their attacks to point-blank range, even ramming the bombers if necessary. It was a suicidal mission, a testament to the desperation of the air war over Germany. The FW-190's encounter with the P-51 Mustang was a turning point. The Mustang, with its laminar flow wing and Packard-built Merlin engine, was a superb high-altitude escort fighter. It could match the FW-1 in speed and maneuverability at high altitudes and had the range to escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The arrival of the Mustang in large numbers in early 1944 spelled the beginning of the Luftwaffe's fighter force. The FW-190 was still a deadly opponent, especially in the hands of an experienced pilot, but the sheer numbers of Allied fighters, combined with the declining quality of German pilot training and a chronic fuel shortage, meant that the odds were becoming insurmountable. The skies over the Reich became a hunting ground for the Mustangs, and the FW-1, once the hunter, was now the hunted. As the war progressed, the role of the FW-190 began to change. The strategic bombing campaign by the American 8th Air Force was gaining momentum. Huge formations of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators, escorted by long-range fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt and later the P-51 Mustang, were now striking deep into the heart of Germany. The Luftwaffe was forced onto the defensive. The FW-190, originally designed as an offensive fighter, was now tasked with a new, desperate mission: to stop the bombers. To do this, it was up-gunned and up-armored. New variants known as Sturmböcke, or battering rams, were introduced. These were heavily armed FW-190s, some equipped with massive 30mm cannons, designed to break up the bomber formations. The pilots of these Sturmböcke units were expected to press their attacks to point-blank range, even ramming the bombers if necessary. It was a suicidal mission, a testament to the desperation of the air war over Germany. The FW-190's encounter with the P-51 Mustang was a turning point. The Mustang, with its laminar flow wing and Packard-built Marine engine, was a superb high-altitude escort fighter. It could match the FW-1 in speed and maneuverability at high altitudes and had the range to escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The arrival of the Mustang in large numbers in early 1944 spelled the beginning of the end for the Luftwaffe's fighter force. The FW-190 was still a deadly opponent, especially in the hands of an experienced pilot, but the sheer numbers of Allied fighters, combined with the declining quality of German pilot training and a chronic fuel shortage, meant that the odds were becoming insurmountable. The skies over the Reich became a hunting ground, and the FW-1, once the hunter, was now the hunted. Even as the tide of war turned, Kurt Tank and his team were not idle. They were already working on the next generation of the FW-190, a high-altitude version known as the FW-190D, or Dora. The Dora was a significant redesign, featuring a powerful new inline engine, the Junkers Jumo 213. This gave it the high-altitude performance that the earlier radial-engined versions lacked. The FW-190D9, which entered service in the late summer of 1944, was arguably one of the finest piston-engined fighters of the war. It was faster than the P-51 Mustang at most altitudes and was a superb dogfighter. But it was too little, too late. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. There were not enough Doras, not enough experienced pilots, and not enough fuel to make a difference. The long-nosed Dora, as it was called, was a final, brilliant flash of technological genius in a losing war. The legacy of the FW-190 is complex. It was a masterpiece of aircraft design, a machine that was years ahead of its time. It was a symbol of German engineering prowess and a testament to the vision of Kurt Tank. It was also an instrument of a brutal and aggressive war machine. The Butcher Bird earned its name through its deadly efficiency, and for the Allied pilots who had to face it, it was a symbol of terror in the skies. But beyond the politics and the propaganda, the FW-190 stands as a landmark in aviation history. Its design principles, such as the pilot-friendly cockpit, the rugged construction, and the use of advanced systems, influenced a generation of aircraft designers. Its impact on the air war was undeniable. It forced the Allies to accelerate their own fighter development, leading to the creation of legendary aircraft like the Spitfire Mk9 and the P-51 Mustang. The FW-190 was a catalyst for innovation, a benchmark against which all other fighters were measured. After the war, Kurt Tank continued his career as an aircraft designer in Argentina and India. The FW-190, however, was relegated to the history books and museums. Today, only a handful of original FW-190s survive. But the legend of the Butcher Bird lives on. It is a story of technological innovation, of courage and sacrifice on both sides, and a chilling reminder of the brutal reality of aerial combat. The FW-190 was more than just a fighter. It was a symbol of a desperate and all-consuming conflict that forever changed the world. It reminds us that in war, the line between genius and destruction is often terrifyingly thin. The story of the Focke-Wulf 190 is a cautionary tale, a lesson written in the contrails of battle across the skies of a continent at war. It serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of conflict and the relentless pursuit of technological supremacy. What do you think was the most significant factor in the FW-190's success? Was it its advanced design, the skill of its pilots, or the element of surprise it brought to the air war? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this journey into the history of one of World War II's most iconic aircraft engaging, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more in-depth documentaries. We've explored the machine, the men who flew it, and the impact it had on the war. But the central question remains: what if the FW-190 had been available in greater numbers at the start of the Battle of Britain? Could this single aircraft have changed the outcome of the war? It's a question that historians still debate, a tantalizing what-if that speaks to the profound impact of this remarkable and deadly aircraft. The FW-190 was a weapon, but it was also a product of human ingenuity, a double-edged sword that carved its name into the annals of military history. It stands as a time when the fate of nations was decided in the skies by brave men and their magnificent, terrifying machines.